Good afternoon and welcome to today's CFIB webinar, Social Media Street Smarts, How to Build a Policy and Prevent Disasters. On July 4th, 2016, American Apparel posted a picture of fireworks to their Tumblr page, except they weren't fireworks. This was a picture of the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster in 1986. This is an error made by an employee of theirs who was a younger employee and didn't know what that disaster was. They had just gone online, found a picture of what they thought were fireworks, and posted it to their page. And this image went viral. They got a lot of negative press and global attention because of this one photo that was placed. Yeah, this is an example of a social media disaster. 2017 is, we're not quite halfway done, and already we've seen some pretty spectacular social media disasters and faux pas. I'll run through a couple of quick examples. We had Pepsi created a commercial that featured a social media celebrity, Kendall Jenner, and the tone of it was pretty off. The intent was okay. They were trying to send a message of peace and happiness, and they were combining imagery with current protests. But what ended up happening is it almost seemed to make light of some protests that were happening in the States, and they too got a lot of negative media attention. They were intentionally trying to create a social media buzz, but they didn't get the social media buzz that they were trying to get. Conversely, I think we've all heard about United Airlines' attempt to reaccommodate passengers. There was an incident on a plane where a gentleman was asked to leave because the plane had been overbooked. He refused to leave, and police officers came into the plane and violently removed him from that plane. And that, nowadays everybody has a phone in their pocket. Everybody can take a video of a negative incident occurring, and that spread around the globe. United eventually had to apologize. They had a huge drop in their stock price. I think their stock price dropped by about $1 billion the day after that went out. And this has been followed by other airlines. It's not just United Airlines. American Airlines had an incident. Delta had an incident. That essentially everybody can use their devices to spread negative experiences on social media. We also have instances like people getting involved in their political point of view, and companies getting caught in the middle of it. The Bay was caught in between Trump protests earlier this year with people boycotting products and actually going onto their pages and putting in negative reviews of products that they hadn't purchased to make political points. Now, it's not all bad news. There's some really good things that can happen by successfully participating in social media. Wendy's had a really interesting year in social media. They had probably one of the best interactions so far with this guy named Carter Wilkerson. He just out of nowhere said, "How many retweets would I have to get free nuggets for a year?" And they just put up a crazy number. They said 18 million. And this guy actually tried to go out and get this many retweets. He ended up getting about 3.5 million retweets. So he didn't quite get to 18 million, but it's the most retweets that have ever happened. The person before that had the most retweets was Ellen DeGeneres, and she's fairly famous. For Wendy's, they got a very large positive bump in social media and traditional media. They essentially got a lot of free advertising for the cost of buying one guy chicken nuggets for a year, which to me is a huge, huge win. Really, what I'm trying to get at is that participating in social media, it is a high reward venture, but it is also a high risk venture. In today's environment, it's very easy for something negative, a message that we don't want to get out, an inappropriate message, to get out in front of our customers and cause us problems. And in fact, you could look at this and say, well, I'm just not going to participate in social media, but you don't even have to be participating in order for you to be impacted. Your customers are going to be having conversations about you on social media anyway. And so you actually do have to participate in order to ensure that you can take advantage of the opportunities and prevent some risks. But how do you do that in a way that doesn't expose you to risk? Participating really does mean balancing some competing priorities. On one hand, we've got a tremendous opportunity to connect with customers, get our message out to them, work with customers to improve our standing with them, potentially to drive business and make sales. But there's a tremendous amount of risk that we have to cover. So in order to do this, we actually need to start thinking of managing this like any other business process. What we really need to be able to do is create policy. And so there's no one-size-fits-all social media policy. I've spent some time looking at various social media policies, and what I find is that there are tremendous differences between different organizations, and you really have to figure out a policy that fits your organizational style. For example, at SelectCom, these are questions that we're going through right now. We're going through an exercise to really understand what is our brand and how do we speak to our customers. And that flows into how will we communicate on social media? Where will we communicate? Who will communicate? Just to give you a little bit about my background before we continue, I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for SelectCom. SelectCom is one of the value partners of CFIB. We provide telecom and communication services for small businesses. Prior to being the CMO for SelectCom, I've run my own marketing and social media agency. I worked at Dell Computers for almost 15 years in various sales and various marketing roles. And Dell is an interesting story because Dell was an early adopter and early leader in social media participation, particularly because they had some early challenges with customers over social media. And so they understood that they had to get really good at interacting with customers and preventing issues that came up. And so they had to build a really clear policy, and they had to ensure that every person that engaged with social media was actually trained. And one of the things that they did is they actually enabled every employee at some level to engage in social media, which is potentially one of the choices that you will have to think about. What we're going to cover today is we're going to cover three things. We're going to talk about why a social media policy is in fact necessary. Then we're going to talk about how to build a social media policy. And inevitably, even though we create a social media policy, there's always going to be the potential that something can go wrong. And so we're going to talk about how to respond in the event that something does go wrong and we have a social media disaster. So let's start with, why do you need a social media policy in the first place? Well, at its core, the need for social media policy is reputation management. There has never been a time that is more dangerous for brands than it is today. There are more avenues to interact with customers and more avenues for customers to interact with you. A long time ago, if you had an issue, or if you had an issue with a brand, you're more likely to tell people about a negative experience than a positive experience. In a positive experience, you might tell 4 or 5 people. With a negative experience, you might have told 10 to 15 people. Well, now, what happens with a negative experience is that people go and vent on social media, and it's very easy to shame a brand for having a negative experience. And so as brands, we need to be on the lookout for that. We need to be able to see risks that are coming to us. We also need to make sure that the people who are responsible for communicating on our behalf are able to do so in a way that protects our reputation. As our small businesses grow, organizations move from the owner doing all of their own social media to delegating that responsibility. And in some cases, it may be an entry-level employee who is managing your social media, or it could be an outside firm that's managing your social media. And are they always saying the things that you want to say? Are they always responding to customers in the way that you would expect them to respond? So reputation management is an important aspect of this. The other reason for this is to maximize our return on a social media investment. And I say investment because this is an important activity. It takes time to participate in social media. To participate effectively, every social media network has its own rules to work with. And we need to spend time building relationships with customers. We need to spend time creating content for customers. We need to spend time engaging with those customers. And that's time that is either your own time spent, which could be used for other activities, or we have to pay somebody to manage that for us, or we have to hire somebody to manage that for us. And we want to make sure that the investment we are putting into those people are paying off in terms of building up our brand credibility, improving our reputation with customers, driving more customers to consider us, and driving more sales into our pipeline. There's also a really good opportunity to improve our customer service and improve what we call a Net Promoter Score. Customers today are actually expecting brands to participate in social media. When a person has an issue with a product, they've got a number of avenues to try and resolve that problem with that product or service. In some ways, they could call or email a company directly, but many customers are starting to see social media as a customer service channel. It's not unusual for customers to reach out to brands on Twitter and say, hey, something's wrong with my product, can you help me? And if they don't get a response, they see that as a customer service failing. If they call into your customer service line and it takes more than a minute for somebody to answer the phone, that's generally a customer service problem. Customers will wait on the phone, but they don't like to. And what's happened is that they've started to see social media as a way of getting immediate attention and feedback from the brands that they're working with. And the brands that are really successful are the ones who are able to respond quickly. So if a customer is reaching out on social media for help and somebody is in there listening and responding and connecting them with the help that they need, their impression of that brand goes up. If there's no response, the impression of that brand goes down. And that affects what we call the Net Promoter Score. The Net Promoter Score is a brand measurement, which is a simple question to customers to say, what is your likelihood of recommending this brand to a friend or a colleague in the future? And by providing greater customer service, that Net Promoter Score goes up. And ironically, their likelihood to share their positive experience on their social media networks with their connections goes up. So we can actually improve our reach and our extension by providing great customer service. The other thing that we have to think about, and another good reason for having a policy, is to prevent legal issues and prevent security issues. It's very easy for somebody to say the wrong thing and actually create a compliance issue or a legal issue for your organization. Somebody could say something on social media that in effect creates a contract with a customer. Yeah, we will get this product out to you in a week, when your delivery times may actually be 2 to 3 weeks. Yeah, that can create a problem. Yeah, there are security issues that can come up. Your social media sites could be hacked if you don't have good password policies. There have been instances where somebody's social media connection has been taken over by somebody, and somebody starts posting really inappropriate content or starts spamming customers because they have that access. And sometimes that access can actually open up access to other programs within the IT environment. Sometimes things can be said on social media that in themselves could be a physical security risk. If one of your employees is on social media talking about how they're going to be on vacation for the next 2 weeks, or how the boss is going to be on vacation for the next 2 weeks, yeah, that could create an actual physical security concern. And so there's all of these aspects that we have to start thinking about when we participate in social media. So how do you build a policy? This is a really interesting question, because we'll show you a resource that has lots of different types of policies, but your policy really needs to be tailored to your organization. And really, there's some things that you have to start to understand. And it really starts by understanding what is your organization's goals and your objectives by participating in social media. And the first question really to ask is, why are you on social media in the first place? Yeah. Are you on social media to try and drive sales? Are you on social media to act as a customer service channel? Are you on social media to interact with customers and engage with them? Are you on there to promote your brand? This question is really important to understand, because it will guide you in terms of how engaged and how responsive you should be. It's also good to understand what's your business culture like. Do you have a business culture that is open and sharing with customers? Are you open to sharing all kinds of information, or is your culture a little bit more closed off and guarded? Do you work in an environment where you have to keep it closed off and guarded? You want to make sure that you're setting up policies that reflect what your actual culture is like, or ideally what you want it to be like. You also have to think about your brand voice, meaning how does your brand talk to customers? What kind of language do you use? What kind of words do you use? How do you respond to customers in specific ways? What kind of tone do you respond to them with? Is it a friendly tone? Is it a professional tone? These are things that will guide how you participate, and potentially where you participate. Who are your customers, and what do they expect? You may be setting up policies internally that fit your corporate culture and your brand voice and your goals, but they may be in direct opposition to how your customers expect you to act on social media. So you also have to take into account what they expect. And then you have to have a good understanding of what are the opportunities and the potential risks involved in our participation, and how will that affect what we need to do. And then we're going to need to start asking some critical questions. The who's, the when's, the where's, the how's, the why's, and the what's. So the first important question, and probably one of the big ones, is who will actually engage on behalf of the company? This is an important one to do. Some companies have it set up so that there is a professional social media team. One person or a small group of people are the voice of the company on all social media networks, and nobody else is allowed to participate. These guys are highly trained. They've got all the company knowledge. They're involved in in big decisions, they're involved in big discussions. In a way, they're like traditional media people. On the flip side, some companies actually allow all employees to engage on social media, or a wider group of employees. Again, this comes down to your culture and your potential risks and what information could be beneficial or harmful if it gets out into social media. And the more people that you have involved, the more complex your social media policy has to be. The next important question is going to be, what are they allowed to say? There should be pretty concise guidelines around what people are allowed to say and what they're not allowed to say. There are obvious things like financial performance and forward-looking statements that probably shouldn't be on the allowed to say list. But are they open to say whatever they want or how they feel about the company? Or do you have some restrictions? Are they allowed to talk about their own feelings about the political environment or something else that's going on social media and how that might affect your brand? So you might have policies and stipulations that say these are the areas that you shouldn't be talking about on professional corporate networks. Or if you are talking about personal views about other topics, maybe maybe you should be saying these are my own personal views, and there's a stipulation of what goes in front of the post or at the end of the post. There should also be some policies about how they should say it. Again, this comes down to your corporate culture and your voice. Do you have a professional tone that they use? Can they use slang? What's out of bounds and what's in bounds? And an important one to really understand is, what are the consequences if they are saying things that are inappropriate, or if they say something that clearly is against the guidelines? What's the punishment if they make an honest mistake, which can happen? Again, this comes down to setting expectations with anybody who is going to be participating on your behalf. Prior to them participating, they should know what they can say, what they can't say, how they can say it, and they should know what the consequences are going to be. If they really step over a line, is that grounds for termination? That may have to be part of the policy. Another factor to think of is, where are they allowed to participate? What networks does your company want to or need to be engaged in? And how are you represented on those social media networks? Are you going to participate on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Twitter? Those are pretty mainstream social media networks. Are you going to be on Reddit? And how are you going to be participating? Are you going to be on Tumblr? Are you going to be on Snapchat? These are really interesting questions that come down to your brand culture and your personality, and again, what your customers expect. Do your customers expect you to participate in Snapchat? Do they expect you to have a professional corporate tone on Snapchat? Probably not. You probably want to really have some thought about where it is that you want your brand to be represented, where people are talking about your brand, and where people are allowed to be talking about your brand as part of your policy. Another interesting question that you kind of need to set expectations around is, how should they be using their own personal accounts? And this is a bit of a tricky one, because employees do have their own social media accounts. They'll probably have their own Facebook accounts. They may identify, hey, I'm a person that works at this organization. Well, if they're using their own personal account and saying something inappropriate, that could negatively impact your brand. And there have been instances where that has been the case, where somebody has said something horribly offensive. And that's not only negatively impacted on the individual, it's negatively impacted on the company that they're associated with. So there might have to be some policies that say, here's how you represent yourself, within your own personal accounts. So we've got some questions to ask. Again, we will give you some resources that will give you some inspiration about different policies that you can use. But we also need to look at what happens in the event of a disaster. So the way that I look at this is when a disaster occurs, in a traditional disaster, we need to think about what kind of disasters are social media disasters. The big one is going to be what we call a business PR issue or amplification of that issue. The United Airlines example is a great example. Somebody did something inappropriate. They interacted with a customer in a negative way. That was taken on somebody's cell phone video, and now the news is talking about it. And because the news is talking about it, everybody else is talking about it on social media, and that impacts your brand. The impact of that is pretty serious. They lost $1 billion of share value in a day. Somebody sharing inappropriate content, an employee could share something that is off-brand or is just wildly offensive, or something could be created that is just accidentally offensive. How do you respond to that? Imposters could be taking over your account. There was a trend for people to go onto Facebook and create fake customer service accounts for specific brands to make fun of customers, as a joke. And while that customer obviously is impacted, and some people can see that it is a joke, some customers actually see that as, this is the brand making fun of me, and that really does hurt your perception. Customer service failures can escalate onto social media. Security issues can occur where people can take over your accounts. Some issues of corporate espionage have occurred by people breaking into social media accounts. You could have disgruntled employees using social media to vent about your organization. There was a great example where HMV had let go about 30 of its social media staff, and unfortunately they forgot to remove the credentials from the social media staff. So one of the staffers was actually live tweeting the termination of the employees as it was happening for all the world to see, which was very embarrassing. And again, you could have a disaster that leads to a real legal liability where something that's put out there can actually be used against you. The way I look at this would be, how would you prepare for a physical disaster? So in the event that a physical disaster happens, we tend to do some preparedness. If there's an issue that prevents us from being able to access our physical building, we may have a disaster preparedness policy that says our employees will work from home and we'll have a phone tree to get in touch with everybody. Or if the email server fails, we have a response policy so that we can get our data back and we can get that server up and running as quickly as possible. It's the same kind of thought when it comes to something like social media. We have to, in some ways, have a disaster preparedness response plan put in place. And a lot of it comes into the preparation that happens prior to a potential disaster that could occur. The first one is we need to make sure that all employees are trained on social media policy. They also need to be trained on what to do if something negative starts occurring in social media. We also have to make sure that the leadership team, the owners, the key managers, that they understand what the social media policy is and that they've bought into it. they really need to understand what the organization's goals and risks are. They need to be a part in crafting that policy and understanding the implications of it. And they need to be the ones to understand that responsiveness and preparation is going to be key. In the event that something negative starts brewing on social media, they are the first ones that really have to be flagged. And they have to understand that the response time for something like this may need to occur in minutes, rather than days or hours. That's an expectation that has to be set ahead of time. You might want to have designated people ready to respond. And so you may have somebody who is your social media point person who understands and has ready responses for negative issues that come up on social media, and they've got the ability to escalate to the proper managers when they need to. The other thing to work into a preparedness plan might be to run some fire drills. And so to actually run some mock scenarios where something negative has happened on social media, and you actually run through a test to see how quickly can we get a response in place. The most important thing in preparing a response plan is to monitor your social media activity and your social media mentions. This comes down to people and technology. There are lots of social media tools, tools like Hootsuite and Sprout Social, that will monitor what other people are saying on social media about your brand. And then somebody needs to have access to those tools and on a periodic basis look at it and get alerts from it. So in the event that something negative happens, somebody is watching that can see it and can respond to it quickly. In the event that a disaster does happen, the process that I've put in place for this is something that I call rapid. And again, we want to be responding as quickly as possible. So the first step in this is to respond immediately, meaning that we can't wait, and sometimes we can't wait an hour to respond to something negative on social media. If it is something that is affecting our brand and people are talking about it, this type of stuff spreads within seconds. It's easy for people to hit the share button on their profile and share it with 100, 200, 500 people. And if something is really, if it's really negatively engaged people, those engage some really deep-seated emotions that we have around anxiety and anger. And when those happen, we are more likely to share wide and comment and participate in it. So we don't have hours to respond, we have minutes to respond. And the best way to respond to something that has a negative impact is to apologize as quickly as we can and mean that apology. Probably the biggest takeaway that I think we can take away from the United Airlines disaster, the passenger who was dragged off of the flight, the CEO had an opportunity to apologize. And the first apology that came out was a non-apology. At no point did he apologize to the passenger that was impacted or the other passengers on the plane. He merely tried to justify why this might have been a reasonable occurrence. And this is where that famous term, reaccommodate passengers, came from. That non-apology also went negatively viral and also impacted their brand. He had a second apology, which again was almost a non-apology, and it was only the third time that he apologized that it was an actual apology. And the problem with that is that by the third time, it no longer came off as authentic. It kind of came off as the Well, I'm saying sorry because you told me to say I was sorry, but I'm not really sorry. And that hurt the company's reputation, and it hurt the CEO's reputation. So, apologizing quickly and kind of taking ownership of an issue, what happens is that it tends to diffuse the tension that's there. The people that are angry about whatever it was that occurred are now somewhat less angry, and by apologizing you get people on your side, and you get people kind of saying, well, yes, this is an issue, but obviously they've seen that there was an issue and they're going to work to correct it. The other thing to do with that response is to personalize it. I think one of the worst things that you can do in a case like this is use boilerplate, corporate kind of legal terms in an attempt to minimize potential liability. The challenge with having something that is that crafted and structured, it in itself doesn't work as an apology or a response, and it can anger more people and get them to further respond. And I completely understand that there's a need to limit legal liability when it comes to things that are said when there's a negative response that comes out. But this has to be balanced against being a real, authentic brand on social media. So while we do need to look at the language, I would say personalize that so that it seems like a human is responding and has heard people. Then there's a promise. There's a promise to improve whatever process it was that caused the issue, and if possible, prove that that process is going to improve. Turning around and saying, yes, we realize there was an issue, we didn't mean for that to happen, this is not the way we want to treat our customers, here's how we want to, this is why it happened, here's how we're going to fix it, you've got our commitment to that. That calms people down pretty quickly. And then the important part of that is don't repeat it. Whatever negative issue it was that created that issue in the first place that people are responding to, the important thing is to correct it. And if it's correcting a process, it's correcting a process. If it's correcting an individual, it's correcting an individual. But in some way or other, to rebuild that credibility you have with that customer, you have to be able to prove that that issue has gone away. If you repeat it, then essentially all it says is that our brand has no credibility and we really weren't going to fix it, and our response really didn't have that meaning that we wanted it to have in the first place. So we have to be able to quickly respond. We have to acknowledge and apologize if necessary and mean that apology. We have to personalize our response, and then we have to make sure that that issue just doesn't happen again. In many ways, while we're talking about social media policy, this sounds like it's very similar to traditional PR engagement. The way that we used to look at PR engagement was there's an opportunity to engaging with media. There's a risk to engaging with media. We have a message that we want to get out to media because they will get that message out to customers, but they can say whatever they want. We have no control over the press. We have no control over what they say about us, and so we need some policies and some guidelines in place that help make sure that those interactions with media are as positive as possible when they do occur. And if something negative does occur in the media, that we have some policies and processes that can minimize the impact of that. This is the exact same thing that's happening within social media today. The only difference is that instead of hundreds of press outlets, there are billions of people who can talk about your brand, and their response time is not hours or days, but seconds and minutes. So it's just a little bit more challenging than it was before. Again, this is an opportunity where there are tremendous rewards available for companies that are successfully participating in social media. We have to balance the risks of participating in social media, and the way that we do that is by working closely with our staff and working closely with the individuals who are responding on social media for us to understand what it is they can't say and how they can say it. In terms of some resources, what you'll find in the resource panel is we've put a link to a site that has a number of social media policies. And so there's some policies from some pretty famous brand names on here. We've got the Adidas Group, we have Apple, we've got BBC, we also have some Canadian organizations, the CBC, different cities, different size organizations. You can get an idea of how these different organizations set policies for their employees to use social media. That will be one good resource that you can use to find some inspiration. We've also put a link to an article, and we chose this article from Ontario Employer Advisor, and we like this because there's a good list of additional statements that you can include in your policy. Again, you'll have to custom tailor a policy to your organization, and you'll have to make sure that it fits with how your organization works. So with that, now I just want to see if we have some questions. We have a couple of questions that have come up. So the first question was, what is NPS? So NPS is Net Promoter Score. As I said, it's a simple survey that you can give to customers that is an indication of brand preference. So what used to happen when we were trying to see if customers liked us or not, we'd probably send customers a 20 question survey asking about all different aspects of their experience. The Net Promoter Score is actually pretty genius because it comes down to asking a single question, and that single question is, would you recommend us to a friend or a colleague? If the answer to that is high, we know we're doing a good job around the experience. If the answer to that is low, we know that we have some problems, and then that's an opportunity to start digging in and asking why. So another question, have you heard of any examples of people being terminated by their employer due to their extremely inappropriate use of social media? Absolutely. There was an example of a person who worked, ironically, for a PR agency, and I'm not going to repeat what she said because it was pretty offensive, but she was going on a plane on a trip to Africa, and she tweeted something out about Africans that was very inoffensive, and I think in her mind she was making an innocuous joke. It just didn't turn out that it wasn't innocuous. She got on the plane, and then by the time that her plane landed 8 hours later, keep in mind, once she got on her plane, she had no access to her social media accounts, no ability to respond to it. That tweet had been retweeted hundreds of thousands of times. Everybody was really angry about what she said, and it was so negatively impacting to her organization that her company had fired her before she had landed on her plane, on her trip. They had to say that we have to terminate this person. So yes, the people have been terminated by what they have said on social media, even if it's not a professional account. So we have another question. Actually, we have a few more questions in here. Can you repeat the two platforms that track how your organization is talked about on social media? So one of those was Hootsuite. Hootsuite is a tool that I use. There's another one called Sprout Social. There's actually quite a number of tools that can provide tracking. Another one I believe is called Radian 6, and there's definitely a few more which we can follow up with some information. So Michelle asked, if we're a small business, should we be monitoring our employees' accounts on a regular basis? So this is one of those areas where you would probably have to think about, is this something you should do? Yeah, and how much risk is there to your particular brand? The important thing here is if you are going to be monitoring your employees' social media accounts, it'd probably be a good idea to let them know that that is part of what your company is going to be doing. And that comes into building a holistic social media policy. It can be, we encourage you to engage in social media. We will monitor our own accounts and our employees' accounts to ensure that negative things aren't being said or inappropriate things aren't damaging our brand. If you're going to be monitoring that, you probably should notify them. You'll see some examples in some of the policies that we put into the resource panel of how companies have worded that. So do you need to have permission from employees before posting pictures on social media if the employees are in the photos? That's an interesting question, and to be honest, I don't know exactly the answer around that kind of usage. I think it would depend on what kind of agreements you already have with your employees. Is there an expectation that they will be photographed as part of their working environment and that you have the rights to use those photos? Is that explicitly stated in an employee handbook or in their employee contract somewhere? That may be something to specifically state out. It does bring up another good question on posting pictures, because this is an area where people can get themselves into trouble. For example, you saw at the very start the use of the Challenger photo. One of the things you'll notice is that I've used a lot of photos in my presentation. I've been very careful to look for photos that have open rights for use. They're not royalty, they're not pictures that cost money or require attribution. If you're using photographs, you want to make sure that you're not using photographs that somebody's expecting money for. In some cases, they may be under a common creative copyright, and you may be allowed to use the photo, but you have to give attribution to the photographer who took the photo. So it really comes down to giving credit where credit is due. So make sure that if you're using photos that you're getting them from the right place. It is a piece that it is a piece that can get you in trouble, especially if you have junior employees going onto Google and scraping photos from whoever, and they're just not educated about that potential risk. So how do you monitor employees' personal accounts? Most of the social media monitoring tools will allow you to monitor any public social media account. So you could monitor your own accounts, you could monitor any individual account, you could monitor a competitor account. Whatever it is you think you need to keep track of mentions of, you can keep track of that. So another question is, a company can't force you to friend them or follow them without them knowing. Do you have to sign anything for the social media policy? So if you're most employee-based social media policies, a good practice is to lay out the expectations for the employee and have them sign the social media apology so that they acknowledge that. I'm not sure if that specifically answers that part of the question. A company can't force you to friend them or follow them. You can, if you're an employee, you can keep your personal accounts private. You don't have to connect with your employer. It's probably a good practice that if you do have policies internally that are a bit restrictive on what you can and can't say, you may want to have some personal accounts that are only within your own personal networks. And yes, a follow-up question to that is I believe people can hide their accounts on Facebook. Are companies still able to see it? No. If you hide your account on Facebook, if you set privacy policies, you can restrict who sees what on your account. Facebook is one of those social media networks where you do have the ability to control your network. Some social media networks are fully open. Most people's Twitter accounts are publicly available. There are some private Twitter accounts, but most people, the behavior is a fully open dialogue. So anybody can see your Twitter posts without actually having to be a friend or even follow you. So that's one thing to keep into account. Another question was, how do you drive sales from social media? Driving sales from social media is interesting because it's not so much going into a social media environment and saying, hey, come buy my stuff. That would be like walking into, a party and starting to walk around and saying, hey, I just met you, come buy my things. You wouldn't do that. In a social media environment, you kind of have to work with the rules of that environment and the social engagement of that social media network. And most of the time, you're involved in discussions and conversations and sharing useful content. The opportunity with social media is to get exposure to your brand, create a positive presence, which in itself could lead potential customers to recognize you, consider you, and eventually enter your sales funnel at some stage. The one rule of sales is that customers like to buy from companies that they know and they trust. And social media is a great way of engaging with customers and building that authenticity, building that credibility, building that trust, and in some ways, if you're really effective at it, building a bit of a personal connection so that when it comes time to buying something, you're the brand and the person that they consider. Okay, so it looks like we've gone through a number of questions. We probably have time for 2 or 3 more. So just check and see if anybody has added any other questions in here. So there's a question about LinkedIn. So the question is, we found in monitoring our own accounts, employees making inaccurate claims of what they actually do for the company. Well, that's an interesting one. That doesn't necessarily, in a weird way, it doesn't quite fall under social media policy, but it definitely falls into personal ethics. If somebody is overstating their accomplishments on their resume and handing it out to an employer, that's eventually going to come back to an employer if somebody asks for a reference check. If somebody's doing the same thing on their social media accounts, as an employer, I'd probably take that person aside and say, we've noticed some inaccuracies in your own LinkedIn policy. You might want to think about correcting that. From a budgetary perspective, how much of a marketing budget should be spent on this? This again is it's not a one-size-fits-all question. Some companies have looked at social media as such an effective channel for driving customer adoption and customer retention, that's all they spend their money on. Some companies look at it as, this is a supporting piece to our existing marketing and sales process, so we'll allocate some of our budget to it. Some companies have said, it's not an important channel for us. We know we've got to monitor it and we've got to pay some attention to it, but we're not putting a ton of focus on it. I think the answer to this question really comes down to where do your customers come from, and what do your customers expect? Is this an important part in driving sales? Is it an important part in improving customer service? Then I would allocate more dollars into that channel. Is there a preferable platform that a small business should be spending their time and resources on? Is that Twitter? Is that Instagram? Is that Facebook? Again, I would say the number one rule to this is be where your customers are. Spend a bit of time to interview your customers. Ask them what social media networks they're spending their time on. Ask them how they use that social media network. Are they participating in groups? Are they participating in forums? Are they sharing content? What content are they most likely to share? The more you learn about how your customers are behaving, the more you can get a sense of where you should spend your time and how you should be spending your time. The other thing to keep in mind is you should probably be answering that question almost every 6 months. The behavior in social media changes very quickly. Right now there's a lot of people who are taking videos on their phone and live streaming videos. And this wasn't a behavior even a year ago. The use of video has exploded on social media platforms. So if that's the way your customers want to consume information, that may be a way of communicating with and participating with customers. If they're spending all of their time on Instagram and they're not on Facebook, well, maybe your time should be more allocated to Instagram and becoming effective there. So again, that really depends on who your customers are. And I think we have time for one more question. Just check and see if anything else has come in. Okay, so that's it for questions. I want to thank you very much for your time. And just as a reminder, if you go to the resources, we have a couple of links for you to look at. And if there are any follow-on questions, I'm sure we'll be able to address those for you afterwards. And that concludes today's webinar.